country has announced a major initiative. Starting today, it will begin escorting commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz. If this succeeds, it'll be hugely significant. Why do I say that? Let me give you a detailed explanation. Second, the US-Iran conflict has entered its second phase, with the top commander being replaced. Now, who said this? It wasn't President Trump who made this statement. It was me, Fanway, who said this. The key is whether what I'm saying is reliable or not. Let me explain. Who exactly was replaced as the top commander? What is really going on in the second phase of the Iran conflict? After you hear my explanation, you can decide for yourself whether what I'm saying is trustworthy or not. Also, after the US began withdrawing troops from Germany, US-Europe relations have become unstable. But will the US and Europe really go their separate ways? And could Europe, China, and Russia actually join forces moving forward? Will the US end up in a diplomatic deadlock? These are also topics I'll be discussing with you today. Another question is whether Trump will visit China as scheduled. Today, I'll also be giving you an answer on that. And behind this visit to China, there's a fascinating power struggle between both sides, which is definitely worth understanding. All right, welcome to Good Morning America, brought to you by Fan Wen. Hello to all our viewers on YouTube, and greetings to everyone listening to Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Now, let's get started. First of all, thank you all for joining us again. If this is your first time watching, don't forget to click the button in the lower right corner. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I'm here every day and never miss a show, okay? Old friends, please also check to make sure you're still subscribed. Now, let's get to the main topic. The Trump administration has announced a major move. Actually, it was announced yesterday, but starting at noon today, a new escort operation called Project Freedom is underway. What does that mean? U.S. Navy ships will begin escorting commercial vessels through the strait. It's called assisting in the rescue of ships trapped in the Strait of Hormuz. So, what happened before this? Over the weekend, Iran gave the U.S. a 14-point plan. Well, to be precise, they gave it to their intermediary, Pakistan, and asked Pakistan to mediate. But President Trump said, "We're not going to Pakistan. There's no need to make it so complicated. If there's an issue, just call us directly." So, first of all, they rejected Pakistan's continued role as an intermediary, or you could say they refused to use Pakistan as the venue for mediation. Second, they flat out rejected it. As for the 14 points, I won't go into detail. There's such a huge gap between the two sides that it's not really worth discussing. In short, what Trump means is that the agreement is just a worthless piece of paper and should be scrapped. So why announce an escort mission at this time? Why say this now? The first question is why announce the escort mission, and the second is why announce it at this particular moment. These are the two main questions here. As everyone knows, the Strait of Hormuz is currently facing a double blockade. There are two layers of blockade. Iran is blocking all ships that are not Iranian or not allied with Iran from passing directly through the strait from the northern shore. The United States, on the other hand, is outside the strait, blocking all ships belonging to Iran and Iran's allies in the open sea. So far, they have turned back 49 such ships. So, in effect, the US and Iran are working together, complementing each other's blockades, creating a perfect blockade of the strait. In English, this is sometimes called a perfect storm, but here we call it a perfect blockade. Of course, the word perfect here doesn't have any positive connotation. It just means complete. It's a total blockade. Right now, almost no ships can get out at all. Currently, it's estimated that there are up to 900 ships in the Gulf, inside the strait, in the Persian Gulf. More than half of those are tankers, roughly 60% to 65%. The rest are cargo ships. The highest estimate for the number of crew members stranded is nearly 30,000, about 28,000 people. Some of them have been stuck there for as long as 65 days, ever since the first day the war started. So there have been difficulties with the supply of food and water, and some crew members are even experiencing mental health issues because they've been stuck there for so long and can't go anywhere. What can they do, right? So why announce an escort mission? Trump himself tweeted directly, saying that as a humanitarian effort, it's to help those innocent people, those businesses and countries who have done nothing wrong but are suffering losses because the strait is closed. Trump went on to say that a lot of ships are already running low on food and other supplies necessary to maintain the health and hygiene of large crews. So, to sum it up, let me interpret this a bit. No matter how unrelated the strait might seem to the U.S., when it comes to America's national and economic interests, the strait is actually pretty far removed, since the U.S. has already become the world's largest oil exporter and producer. And actually, shutting down the strait could help shift the global oil center. And where would it shift to? It would shift toward the US, specifically the Gulf of America. But Trump still went ahead and did it. This April, U.S. crude oil exports hit a record high, reaching 5.2 million barrels per day. 5.2 million? What does that mean? Back in February, before the war, U.S. crude oil exports were at 3.9 million barrels, so that's an increase of over 30%. In this situation, everything is working in America's favor, yet Trump still insisted on doing this. Why is that? I think it's just like he said in his tweet. These are his exact words, and it's the truth. He has a kind heart and a sense of public duty. He feels a responsibility to the world. He can't just think about America, even though he came to power under the MAGA banner. But Trump, in reality, still acts like a caretaker for the whole world, like a patriarch looking after everyone. That's the situation. So why announce an escort mission at this time? I think this point is very important. It's because Trump has finished his risk assessment and now he can take action. A lot of people have been asking, why didn't Trump do this earlier? From the very beginning, escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz is an extremely difficult task. Why is that? Because it's one of the world's busiest waterways outside of a war zone. Last year, there were about 140 ships passing through every day, roughly 70 cruise ships and 70 cargo ships. But how many ships does the U.S. actually have that can carry out escort missions? As you know, with 2 aircraft carrier strike groups, there are only 10 guided missile destroyers in total, and some of those destroyers even have to operate outside the strait for other missions. Blockades outside, right? Some of the guided missile destroyers also have to escort the 2 aircraft carriers. One is the Lincoln and the other is the Bush. So in reality, there are only 3 to 5 warships that can actually provide escort. That's just how it is, and every day. If there are 100 merchant ships, let's not even talk about 140, just 100 coming and going, then what do? How are you supposed to escort them all? Honestly, that's just how it is. Plus, you have to worry about naval mines too, so you just can't cover everything. That's why President Trump has never actually said, we will provide escorts. He only said, we can consider this matter. With so many merchant ships, every one is a target for Iran. Warships are too few and small, so the numbers are out of proportion, making practice extremely difficult. Now, the minesweeping is over. No matter how many mines were actually cleared, or even if there weren't any mines at all, in any case, the Trump administration now believes that the minesweeping is finished and there's nothing much left in the sea. What remains are Iran's missiles, their missile drones, and their so-called swarm of small boats, right? So now, as for the real strength of Iran's swarm of small boats, the Trump administration has already figured it out. The U.S. military knows exactly what's going on, which is why they can tell the president, you have this option now, we can handle it. Even so, if you look closely at Trump's tweet, he didn't actually use the word escort. He didn't use the word escort at all. That's a term I'm using because I'm talking about the essence of the matter, right? What he said was that they would help them leave. He put it more politely, saying they would assist and help them leave. When I translated it, I just directly translated it as escort. But actually, this does carry some risk. Right now, although the U.S. military believes they can provide an escort, according to the statement from U.S. Central Command, they said they would send a missile destroyer. Over 100 land-based and sea-based aircraft, along with multiple so-called multi-domain national platforms and 15,000 troops are participating in this operation. Trump said that if this humanitarian process, well, what Trump said was, what I do is a good thing, a humanitarian effort. If it faces any interference, then we will have to respond forcefully. In other words, if you attack us while we're providing escort, we'll strike back at you. So, in other words, if Iran launches missiles or attacks the so-called humanitarian convoy or tries to surround it, the U.S. would only make this kind of announcement if 3 to 5 of its warships could actually hold the line. So this really is a huge move, much bigger than most people might interpret. People might think, oh, he's just escorting some ships, so what? But it's much more significant than that. If this succeeds, it would be incredibly significant. Let me explain why. Right now, the only real card Iran has to play is to choke off the Strait of Hormuz, and by extension, the world's lifeline. If the U.S. escort mission succeeds, what does that mean? It means oil from the Persian Gulf can start moving again. Global oil prices would immediately drop. Of course, you might say that prices didn't fall today. In fact, they even went up because people aren't sure yet whether the U.S. can actually protect the shipping lanes. But if they can, what would happen? We'd see the entire oil industry, both production and transportation, would have its problem solved. The only thing that would still be blocked is what? It's Iran's own oil embargo. Right, Iran's own oil wouldn't be able to get out. You have to understand, This time it's the UAE that's considering leaving, quitting OPEC, quitting the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. If the UAE alone increases production, it could add over 1.5 million, don't get it wrong, 1.5 million barrels. That means just the UAE alone can offset the oil that Iran can't export. And as for US oil exports, like I just mentioned, they're already at 1.3 million barrels. So right now, oil production is even higher than it was before the war. That's the situation as long as transportation keeps running smoothly. So if things really turn out this way, it would immediately drive down global oil prices, and US gasoline prices would drop right along with them. If it gets to that point, you know. Let's suppose the escort mission is successful and the Iran war ends up being nothing more than an oil embargo against Iran. The US basically doesn't even need to lay siege. As you all know, the US hasn't surrounded the whole of Iran, right? The US doesn't need to lay siege to achieve the effect of a siege, which means putting maximum pressure on Iran at the lowest possible cost. Because, as you all know, since February 28th, the US war against Iran has basically been an air war. And in an air war, it's just us hitting them, not the other way around, right? After taking out their radar and missile air defense systems, it's only us attacking them. They can't hit back. But even so, it still costs ammunition. So if they go with an oil embargo instead, so in that case, it's still just us hitting you, and you can't hit back. But now, we don't even have to use up any ammunition. Aside from burning a little diesel for the warships, there's really no cost at all. So that's what you call a perfect blockade. At that point, Iran would be bleeding out every day, so to speak. Yeah, the country would be losing strength day by day, getting weaker and weaker, until it finally gives in, or ends up like Cuba today. Iran would gradually starve into a tiger that's all skin and bones, unable to move. It wouldn't be able to bite anyone anymore, because if you don't have money, you can't refine nuclear weapons. That all takes resources. And you wouldn't be able to support your allies around the Middle East either, right? Because what do they need? They need you to give them money. If Iran can't even survive itself, how could it possibly give them money? Right? That's the situation. So if this escort mission succeeds, if the ships are able to move and everything can operate normally in the end, I can say this, Trump's war with Iran would already be won. That means Iran would no longer be a threat to the world. So how did Iran respond? They had three major reactions. Of course, their response was extremely intense. First, the Iranian government officially announced that this move was considered a violation of the ceasefire, and the Iranian military has already vowed to attack any US military forces entering the Strait of Hormuz. That's the first point. Second, Iran said that it has already fired warning shots and launched a missile targeting a US warship near the strait. Third, a semi-official Iranian news agency reported on Monday that Iran fired 2 missiles, hitting a US Navy frigate and forcing it to turn back. Of course, this claim was quickly refuted by the US Central Command, who called it nonsense. Central Command responded by saying that no US vessels were hit. So regarding Iran's second and third points, firing warning shots and supposedly launching 2 missiles, well, you could say they're both true, but only in the sense that they were just talking. It was all just talk, not real gunfire or missile launches. Of course, and right now, the latest news, just a few minutes before this program, 2 commercial ships flying the American flag have already successfully passed through the Strait of Hormuz under the protection of the US military. This is the first part of Project Freedom. So as you can see, Trump not only announced the escort mission, but also said our American ships will go first. We're stepping up as a shield for everyone, kind of doing an experiment for everyone. So now, the US military has been authorized to strike any Iranian ships or missile positions that threaten passing commercial vessels. Because of this, US officials have even said that this marks the actual end of Iran's blockade operation. Of course, whether it's really over or not, I think we'll have to wait another 2 or 3 days to see. What's interesting is that just before the show, we saw that Iran has just withdrawn its earlier claim that it hit 2 US warships in the Strait of Hormuz. Now they're just saying that they carried out a warning strike. Yeah, so basically it's a slap in the face. There's really nothing to it. As for whether their so-called warning strike actually happened, there's no way to verify that right now. What we can see is that the Iran conflict has actually entered a new phase starting today. So basically, let me share my thoughts. Trump basically doesn't want to go to war anymore. The war with Iran has now entered a long-term ceasefire. So what's taking its place? What's replacing it is a perfect blockade. And as for the commander of this theater, honestly, I think this Broad Cooper is truly talented. He's really effective and his military operations are impressive. You just feel like he's a master at warfare. That's the kind of commander he is for the Central Theater. But now, the new commander, as announced by Fong Wei, is Treasury Secretary Besant. Why is that? On April 14th, Besant gave a speech in the Wall Street Journal, officially announcing that they're launching Operation Economic Fury, which they're calling an economic epic of rage. So after he made the announcement, actually, the so-called Iran war for the US shifted from a military operation called Operation Epic Fury to Operation Economic Fury, meaning it moved toward a policy of comprehensive economic pressure. There are four main aspects here. First is tightening sanctions, second is freezing assets, third is blocking oil exports, and fourth is targeting shadow banks and cryptocurrencies. These might not sound like a big deal at first, but let me break them down for you. Listen closely. The first is sanctions, and it's not just sanctions against the Iranian regime. These are secondary sanctions, meaning sanctions on any entity doing business with Iran. For example, there are two Chinese companies that helped Iran earn billions of dollars. One is in Dalian, the Yaning, on Changsing Island. There's a petrochemical complex on Changsing Island, and the company running this complex claims to be a private enterprise, but it's definitely not truly private. The ties with the government are extremely close. The company is called Hengli Petrochemical. Hengli Petrochemical can refine 800,000 barrels of oil a day. So if you call it a teapot refinery, that's really not accurate. It's actually a massive operation. 800,000 barrels is more than half of China's total oil imports from Iran. This refinery is on a huge scale. They were sanctioned. The second company is Qingdao Haiyei, officially called Haiyei Oil Terminal Company Limited. It's a transportation company. As you know, Iranian oil, when it's shipped from Iran to China, has to evade US sanctions along the way, right? So during the journey, where are the ships? Near the Strait of Malacca. Ships have to do ship-to-ship transfers, change their identities, and the oil transport routes have to be concealed. So the US can't catch them, but in the end, the oil still arrives at this docking terminal, right? And that terminal is this one in Qingdao. Alright, so as a result, they ended up helping Iran make billions of dollars, but then both Vicente and the terminal got sanctioned. What does that mean? It means cutting off the oil transportation route and cutting off the terminals for loading and unloading oil. And also cutting off the oil refineries that process the crude oil. Basically, in the end, this means Iran can't make any money. Either the oil can't be shipped out, or even if it is, there's no profit to be made. Isn't this just like the Battle of Guandu, cutting off the enemy's supply lines? What Vicente did was exactly that, cutting off their supply lines. This marks the second phase of the Iran conflict. The second tactic is asset freezing, and freezing assets is no simple matter. It's not just about freezing the $20 billion of Iranian assets overseas. It also involves freezing the personal and private assets of high-ranking Iranian officials abroad. So all the high-ranking officials' private accounts overseas, especially in Gulf countries, were dug up and exposed. For many Iranian officials, you could say this was about corruption. Overnight, everything went to zero. This was the most painful thing for them. Let me just add here, if the same tactic were used against the Chinese Communist Party, it would be just as excruciating for them. Don't be fooled by how powerful the CCP seems. What do they care about most? What are they most afraid of? It's not American fighter jets or being surrounded and blockaded or anything like that. None of that compares to having their personal assets overseas confiscated. That's the most devastating thing. In fact, Americans and the Trump administration know about this tactic. They know it's a trump card. They just haven't used it yet. So when it comes to so-called national interests or party interests, everyone is just trying to make as much money as they can while they're on the Communist Party's ship. But if the money you make ends up being confiscated in the end, what's the point of making it in the first place, right? So this crackdown is really severe. Third, there's the blockade of oil exports, which is being handled by the military. This doesn't have much to do with Besant. We've already talked about this at length earlier. The fourth point is also very important, targeting shadow banking and cryptocurrencies. Now, Besant said just yesterday, he said, "We believe Iran is collecting what you could call a toll or passage fee for the Strait." Do you know how much they've collected in these tolls and passage fees? He said, "We estimate they've collected $1.3 million. Note, that's not $130 million, it's $1.3 million. If they could actually collect $130 million, that would be a quarter of Iran's normal daily oil export revenue. Maybe a third, a little more than a third, somewhere between one third and a quarter. Let's just say a third. Even then, that's just a drop in the bucket, isn't it? If they've only collected 1.3 million so far. That's what you call a drop in the bucket. And why is that? Because even if you have the money, you can't pay it. What bank are you going to use to make the payment? The US just sanctions whatever bank you use, so there's no way to make the payment. So what do? You can only pay in cash. Think about it. Those 900 ships, do they really have a lot of cash on board? And even if you use cash, which country's currency are you going to use? If you use US dollars, it's kind of embarrassing, right? And you don't have Chinese yuan either, do you? So, of course, there's still the option of using cryptocurrency. That's why Besson said, if you use cryptocurrency, we'll sanction you too. Whichever platform issues the coin you use, we'll sanction that platform. So what do you do then? So basically, everything is completely blocked off. That's why Besson really is a financial genius. He's basically sealed off every bit of breathing room, every space for survival that Iran had. So Besson said, because Iran's ports are under blockade, Iran might now have to start shutting down its oil fields, starting this week. So now, what is Iran facing? Massive unemployment among oil and steel workers, soldiers and government officials not getting paid, nationwide inflation and shortages of goods. Even if they want to sell oil, there's nowhere to store it now, all because of the US, because of Iran's oil. The infrastructure is already starting to age. Besson said that because of decades of sanctions, they haven't been able to maintain it. Their oil storage facilities are filling up. Once they're full, they'll have to shut down the oil fields. We think this will happen next week. This is what he said yesterday, so it's going to happen this week. So if Trump takes this action today, it's actually a probing move. He hasn't gone all in with his words, and he didn't use the word escort. He used assist in leaving. But if the operation to escort ships through the strait succeeds, basically, the Iran war would be 90% won, and after that, it's just a matter of waiting, just waiting for Iran to run out of steam. That's the situation. The US could pretty much declare victory. That's my opinion. Do you agree or not? Everyone's welcome to share your thoughts. So as you can see, oil prices are still going up today. So what's the reason? The reason is that everyone's watching to see, can you really pull off such a big move? Can it actually be implemented? Can it succeed? If it does succeed, the whole situation will change dramatically. So let's keep watching and see what happens next, okay? All right, now let's talk about how the situation between the US and Europe will change after the US withdraws troops from Germany. I want to discuss this topic with everyone. It's a bit ahead of the curve, but let's explore it. The US is pulling out 5,000 troops from Germany, so how will Germany react? Let me start by talking about Germany's response. German Chancellor Merkel had two responses. First, she firmly opposes Iran possessing nuclear weapons. Second, I will not give up cooperating with the United States. In other words, what does this mean? It's like saying, Trump, you're turning your back, but I'm not. I'm not turning my back. I'm just making a comment, and that's fine. If you handle it this way, Trump won't escalate things further, and US-German relations won't get any worse. But there really is an issue here. What's going to happen with NATO moving forward? Because since Trump is withdrawing troops from Germany, right? So where is he going to send those troops? Is he bringing them back or what? That's why, some people have been constantly giving Trump suggestions to change NATO, to turn NATO into a new NATO. I actually talked about this topic last night on that show called Feng Xing Wei. I felt like there weren't too many viewers last night, so please don't mind me repeating myself. I'll go over it quickly again because it's really, really important. Changing NATO. What does that mean? It means changing it into what's called a tiered NATO, a hierarchical NATO. What does that mean? The main source of this idea actually comes from one of Trump's most trusted generals. But there's a retired U.S. Army lieutenant general named Keith Kellogg. Kellogg served in the military for over 30 years, participated in the Vietnam War, and later rose through the ranks in various staff positions within the U.S. military. Later, before retiring, he served as the executive secretary of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. After retiring, he became the chief of staff of the National Security Council during Trump's first term. Or you could say chief of staff. Later, he was promoted to deputy national security advisor at the National Security Council. His style is pragmatic and low-key, but he was someone Trump trusted a lot. As everyone knows, the Trump administration imposed a strict oil embargo on Iran. That was his idea. So he was the one advising Trump. He said, back in Trump 1.0, I kept telling Trump about this, and I've been talking to him about it ever since. So what is Trump considering now? He said, NATO originally had 12 member countries, but now it's grown to 32. However, it's all just empty growth because neither the old nor the new member countries are putting money in. So except for the US, the defense industries and militaries of all the other NATO countries are shrinking. He gave an example. Take the UK, for instance. They have 2 aircraft carriers, but do you know how they're being used? Both are under maintenance and can't be deployed. The UK currently has 6 combat brigades, but only 1 is actually combat ready. The other 5 can't be sent out. So why is that? I looked it up. Why is it that the other 5 brigades just sit there and can't be deployed? It's because their equipment is outdated and maintenance is lacking. Many armored vehicles and artillery pieces are either mothballed or waiting for repairs, so even if you take them out, they can't be used. That's the reason. And as for the rest, they just can't be deployed. The UK, as pretty much one of the main countries in NATO, probably the 3rd largest, its national defense has become hollowed out. Let me give you an example. During World War II, the British military had 9 million personnel, and the Royal Navy had 1,400 warships. Today, the British military has 200,000 people, including reservists, 200,000 with the reserves. And now there are only 25 warships, and most of them can't even move or be deployed. They're all under repair. To put it bluntly, the weapons are all rusting. Maintenance is lacking, so they can't even be deployed. That's the situation. So what can be done? Well, General Kellogg suggested dividing NATO into 3 tiers. The first tier, called Tier 1, includes countries with high defense spending, strong military capabilities, and a willingness to cooperate closely with the United States. Who are these countries? Poland and the 3 Baltic states, basically the Eastern European countries, would be given the highest level of American security guarantees, the best intelligence sharing, and priority access to advanced weaponry. The second tier would be those countries willing to gradually increase their defense spending. But for countries with more limited capabilities, like the UK, Germany, France, and Italy, they would receive only partial guarantees. The level of defense commitment promised by the US would be a notch lower, and these countries would need to take on more responsibility themselves. The third tier, Tier 3, would be countries with low defense spending, unimportant geographic locations, or those that simply don't cooperate with the US at all. For these, the level of security guarantee would be the lowest, and they might even be excluded from NATO altogether. Who are we talking about? Anyone could guess. Spain.